quiet streets of Manhattan, turning into mirrors that reflected the glimmer of streetlights and hurried umbrellas. Inside a small, time-worn diner on the corner of 7th Avenue, the smell of fresh coffee and burnt toast filled the air. It was the kind of place people forgot existed. A refuge for the lonely, the overworked, and the ones running from something they could never quite name. Behind the counter, Ethan Cole moved like clockwork. Pouring coffee, taking orders, flashing tired smiles that never quite reached his eyes. He was 32, though life had etched a few more years into his face. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked by hard work, and his gaze often drifted toward the window, where the rain hit like memories he couldn't wash away. At the back of the diner, a small girl sat quietly in a corner booth, sketching on a napkin with crayons. Her name was Lily, 7 years old, with a mess of chestnut curls and the kind of smile that could melt the coldest heart. Every few minutes, Ethan would glance at her, his expression softening. She looked up occasionally to show him her drawings, and he'd nod, pretending he wasn't drowning in exhaustion, just to keep her world steady. The bell above the diner door chimed, jolting him back. Another customer, another order. But this one was different. A woman stepped inside, her presence slicing through the hum of chatter like a sharp note in a soft melody. Her umbrella dripped with raindrops that glittered under the fluorescent lights, and her dark trench coat clung to her tall, poised frame. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she approached the line. Phone in hand, expression unreadable yet commanding. No one recognized her, not yet. But Ethan did. For a split second, his hand froze on the coffee pot. His heart gave a stuttered beat. The kind that felt like both recognition and regret. He blinked, hoping he was wrong. But as she lowered her phone and met his gaze with piercing blue eyes, the past he'd tried so hard to bury came rushing back. Amelia Hart. The name itself felt like a wound. He quickly looked away, pretending to be busy wiping down the counter. Customers shifted impatiently in line, the diner was busy tonight, and he couldn't afford distractions. Not again. Next, he called out, forcing steadiness into his voice. A young man ordered a burger and fries. Ethan moved on, hands automatic, heart in disarray. He didn't look up again until her voice, soft but firm, cut through the noise. Coffee, black. Just 2 words. But the sound of her voice almost undid him. He poured without a word, sliding the cup toward her, careful not to meet her gaze. She took it, fingers brushing the rim, watching him with quiet intensity. "You don't recognize me, do you?" she asked suddenly. Her tone was calm, but beneath it was something fragile, uncertain. Ethan didn't look up. "Ma'am, I've got a lot of customers. Can't say I remember everyone." A faint scoff. "Right. Everyone. Including the woman you once said you'd never forget." That did it. He froze, eyes darting up to hers. For a heartbeat, time stood still. He saw the same woman he once loved. The same one who'd walked away without looking back 8 years ago, leaving behind silence and unanswered questions. But now, there was something different in her face. Something heavier. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, another customer called for a refill, breaking the moment. He exhaled, looked away, and muttered, "Enjoy your coffee." Amelia lingered for a moment, eyes flickering between him and the little girl in the corner booth. She noticed the crayon drawings, the half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich, the small backpack with a unicorn keychain. Her breath caught. "Cute kid," she said softly. "Yours?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, mine." Something shifted in her expression. Something almost like pain. She nodded, taking a sip of her coffee, gaze distant. Then, after a pause that stretched too long, she leaned in slightly across the counter. Her voice dropped to a whisper, so low it nearly vanished beneath the clatter of dishes and murmurs of conversation. "Ethan," she murmured, "you need to meet your daughter." The world seemed to fall silent. The rain, the chatter, the ticking of the old wall clock. All of it faded. He stared at her, confusion giving way to disbelief. "What did you just say?" he breathed. Amelia's lips trembled slightly, her composure cracking for the first time. "You heard me," she whispered. You have another daughter." His grip on the coffee pot tightened until his knuckles whitened. "That's not funny, Amelia." "I'm not joking," she said, her voice trembling now. "Her name is Grace. She's 6. And she's yours." For a long, unbearable moment, Ethan just stood there, caught between the past he thought he'd buried and a truth too impossible to grasp. The sound of Lily's laughter from the corner barely reached him. His mind was spinning, heart pounding like thunder. "Why are you here?" he finally managed, voice raw. Amelia's eyes glistened. Because she's sick, Ethan. And she needs you. The cup in his hand slipped, shattering against the floor. Coffee spread like dark blood across the tiles. And just like that, the life he thought he knew was gone. Cup shattered, every head turning toward the sound. Ethan stood motionless, the fragments of porcelain glinting at his feet, his reflection fractured in the mess he'd made. "Hey, Ethan, you good man," his coworker, Rick, called from behind the grill, spatula in hand. Ethan forced himself to move, kneeling, gathering the pieces with trembling fingers. "Yeah," he said, barely above a whisper. "Just slipped." Amelia watched him from across the counter, her knuckles white around the coffee cup. There was a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but also determination. The rain outside hammered harder, as if echoing the chaos inside him. Lily's voice broke through, soft and curious. "Daddy. What happened?" He turned toward her, his features instantly softening. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a little accident. Stay there, okay?" She nodded and went back to coloring, humming to herself, blissfully unaware that her father's world had just cracked open. Ethan straightened, forcing composure, his voice low as he leaned toward Amelia. "You can't do this here." "Then where?" she whispered. "You didn't answer my calls. I had no choice." He glanced around. The line was growing again, customers were starting to murmur impatiently. "Not now. Not here," he said sharply. "You need to go." Amelia hesitated, eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she placed a card on the counter, sleek, embossed with the golden insignia of Hart Enterprises, her empire. "Meet me at the Westbridge Hotel. Room 504. Tonight. Amelia." But she was already turning, her heels clicking against the floor, her perfume lingering like a memory he never escaped. The bell above the door chimed again. And then she was gone, swallowed by the storm outside. Ethan stared at the card for a long time, the letters blurring as his thoughts spun. Hart Enterprises. Billionaire CEO. The woman who'd once sat with him in college cafeterias, barefoot, laughing about how they'd conquer the world together. Now a name printed in gold. He shoved the card into his pocket, just as Rick appeared beside him, eyebrows raised. "What was that about?" "Nothing," Ethan muttered. "Didn't look like nothing," Rick said with a smirk. "That woman looked like she stepped out of a Wall Street fantasy." "You know her?" Ethan didn't answer. He went back to work, but his hands were no longer steady. Every plate he served, every refill he poured, felt mechanical. His mind kept replaying her words. "She's sick, Ethan. And she needs you." When the shift finally ended, the diner lights dimmed, and the last customer left. He leaned against the counter, head in his hands. Lily had fallen asleep in the booth, her crayons scattered like tiny, innocent secrets. He walked over, brushed a curl from her forehead and whispered, "You're all I have, Lily. You and me against the world, remember?" But his voice trembled, betraying him. Because if what Amelia said was true, then maybe he wasn't the father he thought he was. Maybe his life wasn't as solid as he believed. He carried Lily home through the rain, her small arms looped around his neck, her head resting on his shoulder. Their apartment was modest. A one-bedroom space above a laundromat, the walls adorned with Lily's drawings instead of art. It smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon from the candles he burned to chase away the emptiness. He laid her in bed, tucking the blanket under her chin. She stirred slightly, murmuring, "Good night, Daddy." He smiled faintly. "Good night, sweetheart." Then he sat in the dark living room, staring at the card on the table. The words Room 504, Westbridge Hotel glared back at him like a challenge. He told himself not to go, told himself it was probably a cruel misunderstanding, or worse, a trap. But beneath all that anger and fear was something else. Hope. A fragile, desperate hope that maybe there was another little girl out there with his eyes, his smile. That maybe he hadn't lost everything when Amelia left. At 10:47 p.m. he found himself standing outside the hotel anyway. The Westbridge was the kind of place that didn't belong in his world. Gold-trimmed marble floors, a chandelier glittering like ice, soft piano music echoing through the lobby. He felt out of place instantly, wearing his worn diner jacket and wet boots. The concierge gave him a polite but questioning look as he passed. He hesitated outside room 504, his heartbeat loud enough to drown out his thoughts. He raised his hand, then dropped it again. Finally, he knocked once, the door opened. Amelia stood there, barefoot now, hair damp from the rain, no longer the perfectly composed CEO. There was exhaustion in her eyes, and fear. "You came," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have," he replied. "Maybe not," she admitted, stepping aside. "But you did." He walked in. The suit was dimly lit, warm, a fire flickering in the hearth. On the couch, a small girl lay sleeping under a blanket. Her skin was pale, her breathing soft but labored. Amelia knelt beside her, gently brushing her hair back. "Ethan, this is Grace." He froze. The child stirred, her eyelids fluttering open just enough for him to see her eyes. Gray-green, just like his. And in that moment, the ground fell away. He knelt slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Grace." She looked at him sleepily, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "Mommy said you'd come." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to ask how, why. But nothing came out. Amelia's voice broke the silence, trembling. "She has leukemia," she said. "We've tried everything. The doctors say her best chance is a bone marrow match, and you're the only one." He stared at her in shock. "You mean?" "Les," she whispered. "You could save her." The room swayed around him. In one night, his world had gone from survival to something far greater, and far more terrifying. He looked from Amelia to Grace, and for the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. He didn't know whether it was pain, love, or something in between. But he knew one thing. His life would never be the same again. Ethan sat frozen on the edge of the couch, the hum of the fireplace filling the silence. The flames flickered against the glass, casting trembling shadows across the room. Shadows that danced over the sleeping child who carried his eyes, his blood, his fate. Amelia poured 2 glasses of water with shaking hands and set one in front of him. Her composure was unraveling. The mask of the CEO slipping to reveal the woman he'd once known. The one who used to laugh barefoot in the rain. "I wanted to tell you," she said quietly, sitting across from him. "But everything was complicated." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Complicated? You left me without a word, Amelia. I woke up one morning, and you were gone. No calls, no letters, nothing. And now, after 8 years, you show up saying I have a daughter who's dying." His voice cracked, fury and disbelief colliding in his chest. Amelia didn't flinch. "I know," she said. "And I'll never forgive myself for that. But when I found out I was pregnant, everything fell apart. My father, he made me leave. He said you were a mistake, that your life would ruin mine. He sent me away to London before I even had the chance to tell you." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Your father always hated me. Because you reminded him that I could love someone outside his world." He shook his head. "So, what changed now? Why tell me after all this time?" Her eyes flicked toward Grace. "Because she doesn't have time. The doctors say we need a donor immediately. I had her tested. She's a match to you in nearly every genetic marker. You're her only hope." The words struck like thunder, leaving him breathless. "You're saying, if I don't, she'll die?" Amelia finished, her voice breaking. Ethan buried his face in his hands, the weight of it crushing him. He had barely been able to afford Lily's school supplies last month, and now he was being asked to save a child he never knew existed. A child who shared his blood. "I don't even know her," he said hoarsely. "I didn't even know she existed." "Then know her now," Amelia pleaded, inching closer. "Please, Ethan. She's been asking about you for years. She knows about Lily. She's seen pictures." His head snapped up. "Pictures? How?" "I kept track of you," she admitted, shame flashing in her eyes. "I couldn't stay away completely. I watched from a distance. I saw you become the father I always knew you'd be." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing. "This isn't fair, Amelia. You can't just appear and expect me to drop everything. My job, my daughter, my life. Because you decided I'm useful again." "It's not about me," she said, standing too, her tone fierce now. "It's about her." She pointed to Grace, her voice trembling. "You think I wanted this? That I wanted to crawl back here, begging you? You have every right to hate me, Ethan. But she doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Her words hit him square in the chest. He turned to look at Grace again. Her small, frail body curled under the blanket, her breathing shallow. The anger began to fade, replaced by something else. Something raw. "Does she know about me?" he asked quietly. Amelia nodded. "She's always asked why her dad isn't around. I told her you were a good man who didn't know she existed." Ethan exhaled shakily, his throat burning. "And Lily?" Amelia hesitated. "Doesn't she deserve to know she has a sister?" He hesitated. "She's just a kid. I don't want to confuse her until I know what's going to happen." Amelia nodded slowly. "That's fair. But if you agree to the tests, the hospital can schedule it immediately." He turned away, rubbing his face. The air felt too thick, the walls closing in. He wanted to run, to escape back to the simplicity of coffee orders and diner grease. But when he looked at Grace again, he couldn't move. He saw himself in her. The same stubborn jawline, the same hint of curiosity in her sleeping face. The truth was undeniable. He finally spoke, voice heavy. "I'll do the test." Amelia's lips parted in disbelief. "You will." He nodded slowly. "If I'm a match, I'll do whatever it takes." For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes glassy. Then she whispered, "Thank you, Ethan." He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the pain behind her strength. The fear of a mother clinging to hope. "I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I'm doing it for her." A tear slipped down Amelia's cheek, and she nodded. "I know." He left shortly after, the storm outside having softened to a drizzle. The city was quiet now, the streets slick with reflection. As he walked, the night air bit at his skin, but inside he felt something stirring. A mix of anger, confusion, and something like purpose. When he got home, Lily was still asleep. He sat beside her, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, her innocence untouched by the chaos of the world. He thought about how easily it could be her lying in that hospital bed instead of Grace. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he called the hospital number Amelia had given him. A nurse confirmed the appointment. Tests at 3:00 p.m. At the diner, Rick noticed his distraction. "You okay, man? You look like you saw a ghost." "Something like that," Ethan muttered. When the time came, he found himself standing outside the children's hospital, clutching the form in his shaking hands. The white walls and smell of disinfectant filled him with dread. A nurse smiled kindly. "Mr. Cole. Right this way, please." As he followed her down the hallway, he passed a window where he caught sight of Grace again. Awake this time, sitting up in bed, coloring with trembling hands. And when she looked up and saw him through the glass, her face lit up with a small, pure smile. That smile broke him completely. In that moment, Ethan knew. No matter what the test said, no matter what it cost, he wasn't walking away this time. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air as Ethan sat in the hospital waiting room, his knee bouncing restlessly. The rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights above seemed deafening in the silence. Nurses came and went with practiced urgency, their footsteps echoing like faint reminders that life inside these walls was fragile, measured in heartbeats and hope. Across from him, Amelia sat quietly, fingers clasped so tightly they turned pale. She looked nothing like the billionaire CEO the world saw on magazine covers. There were no designer suits, no poise, no armor. Just a mother, terrified and waiting. "You don't have to stay," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "They'll call you when the results come in." "I'll stay," he replied, his voice low but firm. "She's my daughter too, remember?" For the first time, Amelia looked at him, her expression a fragile mix of gratitude and grief. "I wasn't sure you'd believe me." "I didn't," he admitted. "Not at first." He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice cracking slightly. "But then I saw her. And I didn't need a test to tell me." Amelia's eyes glistened. "She has your eyes," she whispered. He nodded. "Yeah. And your smile." Silence stretched between them. The kind filled with years of unsaid words and broken promises. Ethan's thoughts wandered back to the past. The nights they'd spent in his tiny college apartment, dreaming about a future that never came. He'd loved her once. Maybe he still did, in some quiet, buried way. But that didn't erase the hurt. The nurse appeared a few minutes later, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cole." He stood quickly. "Yeah. We've completed your tests. The results should be ready within 48 hours. She said kindly. "If you're a compatible donor, the doctors will discuss the procedure and timeline with you." He nodded. "Thank you." Amelia exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. 48 hours. She murmured. "That's a lifetime in here." Ethan looked at her. "How's she doing right now?" "Some days are good. Others." Her voice trailed off. "She hides how tired she really is. She doesn't want me to worry." "That sounds like you," he said before he could stop himself. Her lips quirked faintly. "And she's stubborn like you." For a brief second, they both smiled, the first real smile they'd shared in years. But it faded as quickly as it came when Grace's doctor appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Hart," he said gently. "Grace is awake and asking for you." They followed him down the corridor. The closer they got to Grace's room, the more Ethan's chest tightened. He'd seen plenty of pain in life. But nothing prepared him for the sight of his daughter hooked to tubes and monitors, her tiny frame dwarfed by the hospital bed. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. Mummy, and... She hesitated, glancing at Ethan shyly. Hi. Ethan smiled gently, his voice catching. Hey there, kiddo, Grace beamed. You came back. He swallowed hard. Yeah. I did. She patted the spot beside her. Sit with me. He did. Carefully. As though afraid she might break if he breathed too deeply. She held out a crayon and a small drawing pad. I was making you something. He smiled softly. You were. Huh. She said proudly, showing him the page. It was a shaky drawing of 3 stick figures. 1 tall man, 1 woman, and 2 little girls holding hands under a sun. That's you, she said, pointing at the man. And that's Mommy. That's me, and what's her name? My sister? Ethan's throat tightened. Lily, he whispered. Lily, Grace repeated, as if savoring it. I want to meet her someday. He forced a smile. I think she'd like that. Amelia turned away, wiping a tear. Grace didn't notice. She was too busy drawing, humming softly to herself. But Ethan noticed everything. The faint pallor in her cheeks. The way her hands trembled slightly with each stroke of color. He reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. You're really brave, you know that. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and innocent. Mummy says being brave means doing something even when you're scared. She's right. Ethan said, his voice soft. And you're the bravest person I've ever met. Grace smiled, leaning back against her pillows. Mummy's scared too, sometimes. I can tell. She tries to hide it. Ethan glanced at Amelia. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the gray skyline. Yeah, he murmured. She hides it well. Grace yawned, eyelids drooping. Will you come tomorrow? He hesitated. If it's okay with your mom. Amelia turned, her expression unreadable. But she nodded. She'd like that. Then yeah. Ethan said softly. I'll be here. Grace smiled faintly before drifting into sleep, her small hand still clutching the crayon. Outside the room, Amelia's composure crumbled. She pressed a hand over her mouth, trembling. Every time she closes her eyes, I wonder if she'll wake up again. Ethan stood beside her, unsure what to say. She's a fighter, he said quietly. Just like her mother. She looked up at him, eyes shining. You really think so? He nodded. I know so. They stood in silence, the hallway buzzing faintly with the sound of machines and distant voices. For a moment, the years between them didn't matter. The hurt, the anger. It all faded beneath the weight of something greater. Before leaving, Amelia stopped him at the door. Ethan, she said softly. If this works, if she gets better, I'll never forget what you've done. For her. For me. He looked at her, his voice steady. I'm not doing it for gratitude, Amelia. I'm doing it because it's right. And as he walked out of the hospital into the fading afternoon light, he finally understood what right really meant. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about saving the future. 2 days later, Ethan's phone rang while he was wiping down the diner counter at closing time. The call display read St. Jude's Children's Hospital. His heart lurched. For a few seconds, he couldn't bring himself to answer. His hands trembled, his mind running through every possible outcome, each one worse than the last. When he finally pressed accept, a calm voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Cole. This is Dr. Ramirez. I wanted to inform you that the compatibility test results are in. You're a full match. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The room spun slightly as the doctor's words echoed in his head. Full match. He managed a shaky exhale. So that means I can help her. Yes, the doctor said gently. What can proceed with the transplant? We'll need to schedule it as soon as possible. Grace's condition is worsening. If you're ready, we can begin preparations tomorrow. Tomorrow. Ethan ended the call and stood frozen in the quiet diner. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The news should have brought relief. But instead, it felt like gravity itself pressed down on him. The weight of what was coming. The surgery. The risks. The fear that maybe it wouldn't be enough. Rick came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. You look like you've seen a ghost, man. What's up? Ethan stared at the phone. I'm a match, he whispered. Rick frowned. A match? For what? For a bone marrow transplant. For. Ethan hesitated. For my daughter. Rick blinked, confused. Wait, you mean Lily? He shook his head. No, another one. Rick was silent for a long moment. Damn, he said finally, voice softening. That's a lot, Ethan. Yeah. Ethan's voice cracked. It is. That night, he walked home under a sky streaked with faint city lights. Lily held his hand, skipping beside him, chattering about a school project. He smiled and nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. At the hospital, at Grace's pale face, at the fear in Amelia's eyes. When they got home, Lily crawled into his lap as he sat on the couch. "Daddy, what's wrong?" He hesitated. "Why do you think something's wrong?" She gave him that look. Her mother's look, sharp and knowing. "Because you're pretending to listen but your eyes are sad." He smiled faintly. "You're too smart for your own good." "So what's wrong?" she pressed. He took a deep breath. He couldn't tell her everything. "Not yet. There's someone who's sick," he said softly. "And I'm gonna try to help them get better." "Like a doctor?" she asked. He smiled. "Not quite. More like giving them something they need." She thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "That's good. You always help people." Her innocent certainty nearly broke him. "Yeah," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "I try." The next morning came too soon. At the hospital, Amelia was waiting for him outside the surgical ward. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair tied loosely, her usual confidence replaced with quiet worry. When she saw him, she exhaled shakily. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Grace hasn't stopped talking about you. She made another drawing last night. Said it's her family picture. You're in it again." He smiled faintly. "She's got a big heart. So do you," Amelia murmured. He looked away. "Let's just get her through this." Inside the pre-op room, doctors and nurses moved efficiently. Paperwork, consent forms, a quick explanation of the procedure, needles, anesthesia, recovery. Ethan nodded through it all, only half hearing them. His gaze kept drifting toward the hallway, where Grace waited with a small stuffed rabbit in her arms. When she spotted him, her face lit up. "You came. Wouldn't miss it," he said, kneeling beside her. "How are you feeling?" She grinned, scared. "But Mommy said brave people can be scared too." "She's right," he said, his voice thick. "You'll be okay, kiddo, I promise." Grace reached out, her tiny hand gripping his. "Will it hurt?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe a little. But I'll be right next door." "Okay. We'll get through it together," she nodded solemnly. "Okay." The nurses came then, wheeling her away. Amelia followed, whispering words of comfort. Ethan stood alone in the hall for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. Hours blurred. White walls, antiseptic air, the steady beep of machines. The world had narrowed to one desperate prayer. Please let her live. When he woke after the procedure, his body ached with deep exhaustion. His first thought wasn't of himself, it was of her, Grace. He croaked, trying to sit up. A nurse hurried over. "She's stable," she said with a reassuring smile. "The transplant went smoothly. Now we wait to see how her body responds." Relief hit him like a wave, tears burning his eyes. He lay back, exhaling a trembling breath. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. Later that evening, Amelia came to see him. Her eyes were red from crying, but her smile was soft. "She's resting," she said quietly. "The doctors think the signs are good." Ethan managed a weak smile. That's good." Amelia sat beside his bed, her hand brushing his. "You saved her life, Ethan." He looked at her, voice hoarse. "No. We did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them hummed with something unspoken. Pain, forgiveness, maybe even love, buried but still alive. She asked about Lily again. Amelia whispered. "Said she wants to meet her when she's better." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then we'll make that happen." Amelia hesitated. "Ethan, I know I can't undo what I did. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of both their lives now. Not from a distance." He studied her for a long moment, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. The same woman he'd loved once. Standing at the edge of redemption. Finally, he nodded. "We'll figure it out. For them." Outside, the city lights shimmered through the window, soft and golden against the night. Inside that quiet hospital room, something long broken between them began. Slowly, hesitantly, to heal. Once felt like a place of fear and waiting had slowly become a place of cautious hope. Grace's body had accepted the transplant. Her color was returning, her strength rebuilding day by day. The beeping monitors no longer filled the room with dread. They pulsed with promise. Ethan sat by her bedside, reading aloud from one of Lily's favorite storybooks. Grace listened, her head resting on her pillow, eyes bright. Every now and then, she'd interrupt to ask what happened next, or to giggle at a funny part. And the sound of her laughter felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Amelia stood quietly by the window, watching them. Her heart ached with gratitude, and something deeper. Seeing Ethan there, patient and gentle, she was reminded of everything she'd lost and everything she still hoped to rebuild. When the story ended, Grace clapped softly. "Can Lily read with us next time?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "She'd love that." Grace nodded solemnly. "Mummy said when I get better, we can go to the park. I want Lily to come too. We can all go, like a family." The word hung in the air, family. It wasn't a word Ethan had dared to imagine in this way, not with Amelia standing across from him, not after everything that had happened. But now, hearing it from Grace's lips, it didn't feel impossible. It felt right. Amelia met his gaze. There was no need for words. They both knew what Grace's wish meant. A week later, that wish came true. The sun was warm, the sky a soft watercolor of blue and gold. For the first time in months, Grace was allowed outside. She wore a little hat to shield her from the sun, clutching her stuffed rabbit as she walked slowly beside Amelia. Lily ran ahead, chasing bubbles that floated through the air, her laughter echoing across the park. Ethan followed close behind, a picnic basket in one hand, trying not to cry as he watched the two girls meet for the first time. Grace looked shy at first, glancing up at Lily as if unsure what to say. But Lily grinned and held out a bubble wand. "Wanna try?" Grace's face lit up. "Yes." And just like that, the ice melted. The two girls began to play, their laughter blending like a melody Ethan had never heard before. One that sounded like healing. Amelia watched, her eyes wet. "They look like sisters," she whispered. "They are," Ethan said softly. Amelia turned to him, her voice trembling. "Ethan, I meant what I said at the hospital. I don't want to run anymore. I want to do this right. For them, for us." He looked at her, the afternoon light catching in her hair, and for a long time, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, "You hurt me, Amelia. You took away years I can't get back. But I've seen what fear can do. How it steals more than time. And I'm done being afraid." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said. "But Grace does. And Lily does. They deserve to grow up knowing their family isn't broken." Amelia took a small step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what about you? What do you deserve?" Ethan hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe a little peace." She reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed his. "Then let me help you find it." They stood in silence, watching the two girls run through the sunlight. Grace's laughter ringing free for the first time in months. The moment felt fragile. Like glass, but also impossibly whole. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the park in shades of amber, the four of them sat together on a blanket. Lily was teaching Grace how to blow bubbles properly, and the air shimmered with tiny iridescent spheres floating toward the sky. Ethan leaned back on his hands, looking at the two little girls, their daughters, and then at Amelia beside him. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my life ended the day you left." Amelia turned toward him, her expression gentle. "And now," he smiled, "now I realize it was just the beginning." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I don't know what comes next, Ethan." He nodded. "Neither do I. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we just take it one day at a time." For the first time in years, they sat without the weight of the past crushing them. The air felt lighter, filled with laughter and the scent of grass and second chances. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Grace leaned against Amelia's shoulder, sleepy but smiling. "Mommy," she murmured, "can we do this again tomorrow?" Amelia brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Every day, sweetheart," she whispered. "Every single day." Ethan gathered the picnic things, but before leaving, he looked back one last time at the park. The bubbles still floating up toward the glowing sky. Life wasn't perfect, it was messy, complicated, and fragile. But it was real. And as he took Amelia's hand, and they walked toward the car with their two daughters between them, Ethan felt something he hadn't in a long, long time. Home. The rain that had once defined his nights was gone now, replaced by sunlight and laughter. The man who had once been a weary, forgotten waiter had become something else entirely. A father, a savior. A man who had faced his past and chosen to build something new from its ashes. And though he knew there would still be storms ahead, he also knew this.